And welcome to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia Facebook Live broadcast for Tuesday, the 15th of September 2020. The end of the year is definitely fast approaching. We're running out of time, so to speak. I'd like to start tonight's broadcast by just covering off a couple of points or questions really that were put to me in the lead up to this particular broadcast from our own members. And one of those was that AOPA has been pretty quiet over the last 6 months. And there had been rumours abounding that AOPA has moved. And so I would like to formally announce this evening that it is in fact correct. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia has moved from its old headquarters facilities at Bankstown Airport into our new headquarters, which is located at number 2 Cirrus Place at Bankstown Airport. And our new facilities are just absolutely outstanding. For the first time in the entire time that we've been at Bankstown Airport, we now have an airside cafe kitchen in which our members can fly into the airport. They can park at our facilities. They can come in and make a hot cup of coffee. And there's also kitchen facilities there for making sandwiches and other bits and pieces. We also have a dedicated barbecue area as well. The new facilities also introduce training labs for us. So we have space in which we can work with members on safety seminars and other briefings and other training activities. And when the COVID-19 situations do relax, we will be very quickly moving into a calendar of events in which we will have activities and a lot of fun stuff happening from that facility Monday all the way through to Sunday. Importantly, we also have this fantastic new hangar facility. And so for members that will be flying to and from Bankstown that may need to come and see us on particular issues, you will now have a hangar facility that you can park your aircraft in overnight or for a few days whilst you're in Sydney on business. And so this has been a huge shift for AOPA out of our old facilities. And anyone that had come to Bankstown Airport and seen our old offices would have known that those facilities were well and truly in desperate need of a big cleanup. And more importantly, there was really no space for us to expand. So all of these wonderful things that have happened to enable AOPA to move into this new facility have all come due to the enormous generosity of AOPA Australia past president and vice president Mark de Stoop, who has very kindly placed AOPA into his facilities for his corporate jet Falcon Air operations. And so on behalf of our board and of course on behalf of all of our members and supporters around the country, I do extend a very warm thank you to Mark and his family and his company. They certainly have gone above and beyond in their ongoing commitment for AOPA, and a big thumbs up from us. The second thing that I would like to raise as well is members have noted that our newsletter services were suspended, and that's exactly right. When the COVID-19 situation kicked off, we, like so many other aviation businesses right across the country, had to immediately move to emergency cost savings right across the board. And part of that was to make certain that we were not spending member resources and money on editorial activities whilst everything was going into a bit of a wind down. And so whilst those services have been suspended since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we will slowly start to bring our operations back out of that state, and we will resume normal editorial functions as soon as we possibly can. In the meantime, what we have done is we have placed an important investment in behind this particular effort right here, which is to communicate with members via video. And I guess you're getting the information right from the horse's mouth. And so whilst we are running our Tuesday night Facebook Live sessions for, we'll call them critical industry concerns, we will also be running Facebook Live sessions on the Thursday, and those will be a mix of industry concerns, but also other stories and opportunities for us to meet people from across the industry and to learn more about their businesses and their products and other happenings. And of course, we do all of this in support of you, our members and industry. And so if there are, in fact, topics or there are items that you would like AOPA Australia to cover, we absolutely welcome you to email us, and we'll do our best to see to it that we get those issues covered. You can also put to us your questions. At any time during one of our broadcasts, you can put questions here in the comment section. I see those questions come in, and I do mark up after each broadcast. I kind of go through and I mark up the questions that I think are important. and that we do need to follow up. So if you have got issues that you would like to raise, feel free to put the comment in, and we will do our absolute best to get back to you. And other than that, before I jump to Nicole and Sean this evening, I just would like to convey a huge thank you to everybody who has been emailing and calling. It is fair to say we have been inundated, and I have been blown away at the support that is being shown for AOPA in running these broadcasts. And it is not, at times they're difficult issues. Some of them are not necessarily pleasant to have to talk about, but they are important issues. And I think that it's really, really good that people are coming out with such strong support to see to it that this continues. So thank you again, everyone, for that ongoing support. Now, enough of all the congratulations and the thank yous. I am really fortunate to be joined here this evening by Nicole Mitchell. Nicole, welcome.
Thanks.
And also Dr. Sean Runacres, no stranger to the AOPA Facebook Live is he.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Now, tonight's story is an extension of an interview or a panel discussion that we had done a couple of weeks ago, which focused on CASA Avmed. And I know that CASA Avmed is an issue that touches so many of our pilot community right across Australia. And it's fair to say, Sean, that you would see this in your dealings, that as people get a little bit older, and trust me, at 41, I'm heading to 42 in February next year, and I can tell you that I'm actually quite surprised. There are things that I do throughout my work week and through my weekend where I pause for a moment. I go, wow, I don't necessarily move as quick as I used to, and I can't necessarily lift the things that I used to lift. And you start to notice that the knees are not as flexible maybe as they were and all the rest of it. So we do age ourselves, like our aircraft. We do age, and we do require good nutrition and good exercise and good fitness. And from time to time, we are faced with medical challenges. But that said, medical challenges that we face in aviation are no different to the medical challenges that are faced by people in many other industries. But what we have seen, Sean, over the past 15 years or 20 years is we've seen a lower and lower appetite by CASA Avmed on many medical issues, and that is leading to more and more pilots being grounded for lengthy periods of time, and then being forced into a situation where they have to work through very expensive processes to get specialist reports and all kinds of assessments regarding those conditions. And this is contributing to the overall decline in general aviation, with many people giving up through the process and simply saying, I'm just not prepared to spend, in some cases, $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 a year being put through those tests.
Yeah, it's very true, and a lot of times I look at the tests and I can understand why they're doing some of them, but there's a lot of times where I look at the tests and I just scratch my head and I think this is unrealistic. Yeah.
Well, one such example of the pain and the difficulty of dealing with the bureaucracy of CASA Avmed is, in fact, our guest this evening, Nicole Mitchell. Nicole is a private pilot flying both fixed-wing and rotary aircraft. And Nicole, maybe before we delve into the medical side of this discussion, if we could start with a little bit of overview. What got you involved in aviation, and what have you been flying, and where has it taken you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben, and thanks again, Sean, for your representation. 40 years ago, Dad was doing his pilot's license over in Benello, so he'd wander across there every Friday and drag me out of school, which was lovely. And I'd wander across and jump in the gliders. So by the time I was 14 or 15, I'd ticked off all my theory from a private pilot's license, and then found other interests in life for a few years. And then 22 years ago now, I completed my private pilot's license in aeroplane, and just ticked along at that, a couple of endorsements and so forth, and then just got into helicopters probably 10 years ago it would be now. Started playing around with that and thought, oh yeah, I did a fair bit of flying, fortunate to do a fair bit of flying with the family I worked for, and they had a really nice aircraft, and that was incorporated in my daily workload, which Up until 2 years ago, I changed employers. Present employer's got a helicopter. So I still work as part of his earth moving team, and fortunately to fly his helicopter as well. So it hasn't been commercial flying because you're flying the owner of the aircraft around. So that's why I've remained a private pilot. So January this year, I went and saw Sean and thought, well, might as well have a crack at a commercial licence and just see where that takes me. Bit of interest in doing flying, instructing and so forth. I've got a few hours now and I thought I could be of some benefit to the industry. So we sat
Maybe
down
Nicole, I'm just going to jump in there before you and I know exactly where we're heading here, but I just, for those that are watching this, and I would remind you that we have a number of senators that watch these videos, and we do submit these videos through to the Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee so that they can be used formally as part of the evidence for their general aviation industry inquiry to look at the challenges that we as an industry face. And if you've ever had the pleasure of being called, and I say it's a pleasure, it is actually quite a pleasure to go before these inquiries and give evidence. But if you do get that invitation to provide evidence, you get a very narrow window to explain some of these concepts. So I'd like to just ask a few questions which would help the senators understand. And that is, as a private pilot, you've made an investment in getting a private pilot license to fly fixed wing and also to fly helicopters. How much money would you have invested? And I know this is a horrible question. I can see Sean straight away saying, Ben, don't ask the question. My wife's probably listening to this. You never add up what you spend in aviation. But how much money do you feel you have invested to date in your licenses? Well, not feel, but do you know?
I don't know, Ben, and it'd scare me if I did. Well, fixed wing, I don't know. Helicopter would probably be 30,000.
Would it be fair to say that you've probably got somewhere in the realm of maybe $80,000, do you reckon, tied up to date?
Quite easily, yeah, quite easily.
So it's a lot of money, isn't it? I mean, it's a huge investment in getting these licenses, and so to be able to use them and to have the amenity of that license is quite critical. And so you've arrived at a point where you've been amassing your experience and your time, and you've been building up your skill sets as a private pilot in two very challenging disciplines, let's face it. And you've decided, right, I might go through the process of looking at getting a commercial medical, class 1 medical, and look at doing a commercial license to see possibly where that was going to take you.
Correct. So I thought I'd have a go at commercial aeroplane and helicopter at the same time, which was quite expensive and challenging. I got halfway through the exams and said, "Yep, well, we better do a medical." And I felt good, got a good advice, and said, "Yeah, you'll be right. We'll all go through it together." So that's when I went back to Sean and sat down. He said, "Yeah, it should be fine." And the little glitch came up in my ECG, and which we went about to check out. Put in touch with a cardiologist who had 40 years experience in aviation medicine, specialising in cardiology, and went through the tests. And he said, "Yep, there's a glitch there, Nicole. You've probably had it since birth." And I said, "Is it something I should worry about, or do we need fixing?" He said, not at this point. We'll monitor you. You should be fine. Go on living life as normal." So I walked away feeling pretty happy and forgot about the issue, and then it went pear-shaped.
All right, so we're going to stop again there, Nicole. Sean, obviously, pilots getting an ECG is not an unusual thing. I mean, ECGs are a fairly standard fare in many respects. I mean, how unique is? I mean, Nicole's situation is not exactly unique to Nicole. I mean, this happens with many people in these results.
Yeah, so I do about 450 pilots a year. Most of them ab initio pilots, because I'm based at a training school or a training airport. And I probably see 50, 60, I don't think I'd get as far as 100 people a year who their ECG just shows some anomaly. One of the things that I learned very quickly is you don't trust a machine to read your ECG. So I found a very good aviation cardiologist, 40 years doing this, and I send all my ECGs to him. 100% of my ECGs go to him. If there's a problem, he'll recognise it and he'll know how to get around it. Nicole's the first person who I have sent off to him, and I've had this response where her ECG looks abnormal. We'll do some tests. Yeah, I've checked it all out. I'm happy. She's good to go flying. And CASA's come back and said, nice try.
Okay, so we might bounce back to Nicole at this point in time. So we've got this ECG report. You've had the blip, though the specialist is saying this is actually not a problem. You're good to go. What next?
CASA granted me a Class 1 medical on top of my Class 2. The only restriction was glasses. Fantastic. This is all good. So I was happy. I kept flying around. A week later, there was an email came through, and it said an error has been made. You've now got restrictions on your Class 1 medical, which was you can only be a co-pilot, and damn it, you can have Class 2 restriction as well, where you require a safety pilot, all within a week. And that was the only explanation. There was no phone call. There was no explanation. It was just an error has been made. This is how it is now. So,
and Nicole, obviously, in the time between CASA issuing you the Class 1 and then coming back and revoking that Class 1 and placing, unrestricted Class 1 and then placing restrictions on you, had any CASA doctor physically, I was going to say inspected, although you're not an airframe, but assessed, did anyone physically assess you or have any clinician of any form, a doctor or otherwise, do any face-to-face contact with you to make any assessments whatsoever?
No, they haven't been. And up until today, they still haven't. They've just based their opinion on, really, I don't know whether it was a computer-generated assessment. I honestly don't know, because their assessment to me has been made as if they haven't even read the results and the recommendations and the letters that Peter Habsburger, the cardiologist, has sent, and the recommendations that Sean's also sent.
Sean, back to you on it. I mean, obviously, it becomes a very difficult exercise when you've now effectively, from what we see here, we end up with a he says, she says scenario. We've got the specialists external to CASA saying, no, perfectly good to go flying, run with it. And then we've got someone inside of CASA Avmed who's saying, no, this is not going to happen. I mean, who exactly is making these decisions?
Well, I don't really know who makes the decisions. I'm not 100%. So when things become complex within CASA, what they do is they go to a complex case meeting, and they get all the doctors who are there on a Wednesday get together in a room and debate a case. Now, I believe, Nicole, you might know, did it go to complex case first time for you? No.
It did.
It
no,
did. Okay.
Not the first time. The first time.
No.
It was
So one individual's had a look at it. Now, I'm just going to set the record straight a little bit. So Nicole's had an ECG. It's got an aberration. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just got something that doesn't fit normal. Now, I've spoken to my cardiologist about this at length, and he talks about a paper that was published in the 70s where the US Air Force were doing ECGs for recruiting pilots for the Vietnam War. And they had a small cohort of people who came up with varying aberrations on their ECG. US Air Force didn't really have a budget concern at the time, so everybody that came up with an aberration had a full suite of workup. And it all turns out that it was nothing. And we know that people have variance from normal. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're dangerous or unwell. We just know that things don't always match up with how we anticipate they're going to. We've got Nicole, a relatively young but healthy lady. She's got an abnormality or an aberration on her ECG. She's had 2 subsequent tests 3 subsequent tests to check out her heart since, the cardiologist has said, these tests demonstrate to me nothing. She's good to go flying. And then we send it off to CASA. And as Nicole says, it's automatically issued by the system, and then somebody's read it and has come back and said, you're not fit to go flying. Now, I'm sorry, the person who's read it isn't a cardiologist. Hasn't been doing aviation cardiology for 40 years. So how this person can actually overrule that blows my mind.
Nicole, would CASA let you fly a A320 with 150 passengers on it tomorrow out of Sydney International Airport to Japan?
Unlikely.
And it's probably unlikely because you're not a commercial pilot and therefore you're not qualified to operate that equipment. But it appears weird and almost hypocritical of the regulator to allow people who do not hold an appropriate qualification, in this case in cardiology, to be overruling medical specialists in the external field. I mean, this must be incredibly frustrating. And I imagine, Nicole, that you've already been put to considerable cost in doing various tests to try and qualify your way through this.
I have. Obviously have to travel from home to Melbourne, which is a 3-hour drive. Kangaroos on the way have cost me some expensive damage on my vehicle. The tests alone, the time off work, I'm sure there's a lot of other people that have experienced this. But the paperwork that was sent to me, signed by David Fitzgerald, I just did a bit of research on his the letters that he had after his name when he signed this paper, and there was not one mention of specialising in cardiology. So it didn't give me much confidence in his outcome. The other comment that he made in one of his letters was your finding carries adverse prognostic significance, including elevated risk of cardiac events and death. So according to this David Fitzgerald, who specialises in whatever he specialises, well, it's definitely not cardiology. I've got a disorder that's elevated risk of cardiac event and death. And then the letter from my cardiologist states, this is an unusual finding in a perfectly, completely asymptomatic individual. There is no evidence at this stage of any significant underlying cardiac disease. I do not believe further investigation is indicated, and in my opinion, Nicole Mitchell is fit for all activities, including flying. I showed that to my employer, Ben, and he said, get out there in the bloody truck and go to work. And he said, then tonight you'll go for a flight. I said, well, I can't go for a flight because this dude's who doesn't specialise in cardiology just can my medical. So frustrating it is. How do these people get away with this sort of stuff? And then he won't answer the phone, won't respond, but is happy to wipe someone out. So the whole thing is just ridiculous. And if they keep
so what has been your what avenues does CASA make available for you, Nicole? Obviously you want this issue resolved. What avenues do they make available for you so that you can pursue a process to try and have this whole thing reviewed or looked at?
Well, one of the avenues was to take it to a complex case panel, which I had done. So Sean and Peter Habsburger sat down with Professor Peter Kisler from the Alfred, I think it was, who specialised in electrocardiology, and they presented my case to the complex case panel. It fronted up to that panel, and they never actually replied to me. I had to chase them up, and their conclusion was that my case was non-decisive. We don't know what to do with you. I said, did you read the actual reports, or have you read anything? They said, yeah, we have, but what we're going to do now is we're going to put your case in the hands of an independent cardiologist.
Can I just, I'm just going to interrupt for a second because I think this is very important. So when Nicole finally received correspondence from CASA as to the reasoning behind, they actually recommended that she undertake either an angiogram or electrophysiology studies, or both. It's not clear. And I've spoken at length with my cardiologist about this. And so the studies, so the first problem is that it's got a cost of about $10,000 to $15,000. Now, because this is not because she's unwell, but for a pilot medical, she's not eligible to get this on Medicare. So she's got to stump up the $10,000 to $15,000. It's used for people who are having major cardiac concerns. They've just had a heart attack. They've got, I won't go into it, but it's used in an acute emergency type situation. So CASA
Sean, are there risks? Are there risks with these types of tests?
Yeah. So 1 in 10,000 chance of dying.
1 in 10,000 chance of being killed by the test itself. And CASA Avmed are requiring these tests?
To get those restrictions removed, yeah, absolutely. And one of the nuances that CASA will say is we haven't grounded her. We've just said that she's got to fly with somebody else. So they'll be getting around it in that regard. But yeah, I mean, the risks in this are pretty significant. If she wants to fly solo, 1 in 10,000 chance of death, 1 in 2,000 chance of some form of complication. Now, that complication could be a bruise. So the testing involves putting a tube into the artery in your groin and poking a wire up around your heart. So you can get a major bruise in the leg. You can get a DVT, which is a blood clot. You can get those in your legs or your lungs. You can get a stroke. So the risks of this are catastrophic for something that in fact, 2 cardiologists have said, we don't need this to happen. And then CASA have seen the letter that says it's not required, which is a letter that I've written to CASA outlining with supporting documentation. And they've said, we're going to try and get somebody independent to look at this. And I'm like, my cardiologist is as independent as they come. He's worked for you for years. He's written reports for you for years. He's got no vested interest in providing an inappropriate report, because that means that the next report you're not going to respect. So he actually wants to do the right thing by aviation, not by Nicole, not by CASA, by aviation. And the report he's written is Nicole is safe to go flying. So CASA have gone one step further, and I haven't seen these documents, but they have sent what they call as case reports. So this is where you have something happen, and as a doctor, you go, oh, that's interesting. You write it up and get it published so other people can learn from it. And these 2 case reports are the reason why Nicole isn't flying. And so what CASA have said is that something that happened on one of her tests suggests that she's at risk for subtle or overt incapacitation. And the comparison is 2 80, 90-year-old gentlemen who've both got significant heart disease. Well, I don't know. Have a look at the computer screen. Nicole's not 80, she's not male, and she doesn't have any significant cardiac disease. So
is this a government operation? Is this a government operation?
So yeah, it's phenomenal.
I mean, Sean, obviously, look, you've participated in a number of these panel discussions to date, and you know that crazy statement. You know, the hits just keep on coming. It really is a case of the hits just keep on coming. I mean, it really sounds to me, and I think that the casual observer would look at this, that this Avmed department within CASA is entirely dysfunctional and incoherent and inconsistent at best.
I've got to be careful because I want to keep my registration as a Damie. There's a lot of truth in what you say. My concern is that in the last 10 days, there are 2 people who are moving on out of Avmed, and they're actually the 2 people who are trying to do the right thing. And they're 2 very senior people.
Well, Sean, I'm glad that you've brought that up, because I'm sure that the Senate, who will be watching this at some point, and many of our many of those that are watching these broadcasts from home, our members and industry supporters, would be very keen to learn that during our last broadcast on Avmed, we named two particular people inside of CASA that we, the industry, speak very highly of, and regarded those individuals as making significant headway in trying to move Avmed forward to become a more progressive and output, results-oriented division within CASA. And we applauded those efforts, and we made clear that we supported those individuals and we felt that they were a breath of fresh air. And it has been incredibly frustrating to learn that shortly after that broadcast, the outgoing Director of Aviation Safety, Mr. Shane Carmody, has taken one of those individuals and entirely removed them from all involvement with CASA Avmed, and has sidelined them inside of the regulator to a non-operational, non-customer facing role in which they are no longer able to apply their positive influence in trying to resolve many of these disastrous situations. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to look at those actions of Mr. Carmody with any positivity whatsoever, other than to simply say that it appears for all intent and purpose that this was done in a vindictive manner.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment.
Sean's like, yeah, why she's like, Ben.
I'm going to steer away from that one. I still want to be next week.
Sean, and I really lament we shouldn't be laughing about it, because it's actually quite a deadly, bloody serious issue that someone, the one person I'm talking about right now, and I'm not going to name their name because clearly there is some real vindictive behavior going on inside of the organization. And so, I commented to someone the other day, I said, if I had known that if I gave my endorsement for someone at CASA, it would lead them to them losing their job, I would say, listen, Jonathan Alec, you've been the greatest thing that's ever happened to CASA. Mate, you and I go way back, top work there. Shane, Jonathan has been such a great guy. We give him our full endorsement, and tomorrow will we find out he's gone? That would be a shame. But, it's horrific. It's horrific to think that key people within the organisation that are actually driving positivity and are producing such great results now find themselves completely sidelined. But, more concerningly, and I think this is something that should bother everybody in the industry, is that it looks like the PMO may not continue, that Simon may not continue in the role. And Simon was a massive positive influence. And Sean, we've had this conversation many times, that he is absolutely been a positive influence. So this is terrible news, and it will certainly put Avmed back towards the Stone Ages, and it may not fare well for pilots who are currently caught trying to get their medicals issued.
So I've met Dr. May once in Las Vegas, of all places. I can't comment on him professionally because I've had very little to do with him professionally, but everybody I talk to and people I respect very highly say nothing but amazing things about the man. It took CASA 18 months, I think, to find and recruit him. He's been here 12 months. It sounds like he's not extending his contract. Who are they going to replace him with? This is a poison chalice. We've had some people I very much respect. The last couple of PMOs, or the one before Dr. May, I got a lot of respect for. My understanding, got fed up with the system and left. I could be wrong on that. But, what are we going to replace it with? And why are we replacing people who are actually doing good for the system?
Well, Sean, let's face it, there's a lot of people who speak to AOPA. And, contrary to maybe poor old Shane Carmody's thoughts, there's many people within his team, and some that are very close to him, that pick up the phone and have long and lengthy conversations about just how poorly the internal workings of CASA are performing right now. Frustrated, deeply frustrated at the way in which the place is being run. And in some respects, some industry commentators would say it's being absolutely run into the ground. And so I think that from my perspective and what I've seen across the last 4 years, this is an organisation that has incredible dysfunction going on. And that dysfunction is spilling out to people such as Nicole, pilots who we need as part of our industry. You know, when I sit at Senate inquiries or I'm giving a presentation somewhere and I talk about industry decline, you know, we're not making this stuff up. The industry decline is actually being driven by something. Now, if we look at Nicole's particular situation, we have a pilot who's invested, it'd be well over $80,000 in aviation. And if we were to add up, Nicole, the number of flight hours you have flown, and we were to apply an average hourly rate to that flight hour, and we were to work out what your economic contribution to the aviation industry has been to date, it would be enormous. And so when we talk about industry decline and we say CASA regulation is driving the Australian aviation industry into the ground, it is driving it into the dirt. What we mean by that is tedious but insidious and toxic decision-making, which is preventing pilots from participating in aviation. You stop one, you might stop $1 million worth of contribution over the next 5 years. You stop two, that's possibly 2 million. You stop 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You stop 100, 200, 300, 1,000. You can quite easily see how you can get to a point where hundreds of millions of dollars are no longer being injected into the aviation industry. And as a consequence, flight training schools aren't getting the work. Aero clubs are not getting the work. Maintenance companies are not getting the work. Fuel companies are not selling product. All the aviation MRO parts and supply chain are not selling their product. And then you end up with an industry in, guess what? Decline. What's going on with the Australian aviation industry and economy right now is entirely manipulated. And it is a consequence of incredibly poor decision-making standards that are being delivered by people in the most inane, in some cases, most stupid manner, where we should see pilots like yourself, Nicole, out enjoying the prime of your life, flying and contributing. I mean, this must just be incredibly frustrating for you.
It is, Ben. And the other part that I found really frustrating and daunting was the fact that after my complex case, and they've issued it to the independent cardiologist, whom they wouldn't tell me, one, who it was. They also wouldn't tell me what the results or what was spoken about in my complex case. And then they wouldn't give me tell me what was actually sent to this independent cardiologist. I thought, well, what chance have I got of actually knowing he's got the correct information to make an unbiased decision, particularly if he's in Canberra, has never spoken to me or examined or anything like that. So I wrote to the Freedom of Information Act. And of course, surprise, surprise, no, we can't pass on any of that information. The only information we can pass on to is pretty much the letterhead of the email that was sent to this.
So sorry, Nicole, what excuse were you given that they could, and I understand, I've got this correctly, you were requesting, you put an FOI request, a Freedom of Information request in to obtain all the documentation in relation to your particular case. So in order for you to defend your medical position, you wanted a concise and accurate accounting of all the documentation that CASA was using to rely on to withhold you your medical, correct?
Correct.
And you've put an FOI request in for this. And instead of simply providing you with this information, which, by the way, wake up, CASA, you're supposed to be a model litigant. That means you are supposed to facilitate things and allow people the opportunity to defend themselves. That's what the whole role model litigant thing's about. But instead of them providing that to you, you get your FOI denied and you end up getting some documents with some letterheads, correct?
That's right, yeah. So the first one, which was my complex case management request, fully denied under section S47C, and the email that the information that CASA were providing to this mystery cardiologist was not, they wouldn't provide that to me either. So I don't know what they've sent him. I don't know whether it's the full truth, the half truth, or how they want the result turned out to be.
Sean, why are CASA, now you may not know the answer to this, but it may be a rhetorical question. What benefit is it to CASA to stop Nicole from having all documentation that pertains to her medical case and the decision-making processes? Why would they not want to provide that information, maybe?
I cannot understand. I can't. So the only reason I can think of to withhold information is so that people don't get information on the inner workings and learn how to manipulate the system. That would be my,
So your view might be that if they actually allow a pilot all of the concise information, that pilot might actually stand half a chance of mounting a successful rebuttal that leads to an outcome in the pilot's favour.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But you can't manipulate the system. No doctor is going to write a report that says, I think Nicole Mitchell's got an absolutely dicky heart, but she's good to go flying. Because everybody will come back and make life difficult for that doctor at the end of the day when something catastrophic occurs. So this is the doctor's reputation. I've stuck my reputation on the line. The cardiologist has stuck his reputation on the line. And not that we think we're hanging ourselves out to dry, but we've made an assessment of Nicole and the situation and the concerns and the facts, and we've said she's safe to go flying. Now, personally, I wouldn't say that by myself. I don't have the knowledge and experience myself to be making that decision. Hence, I've sent her off to a cardiologist, somebody who knows their stuff backwards. I mean, he's been practicing medicine, close to 60 years.
Probably knows a few things.
You'd think. And he spent most of those 60 years looking at people's hearts. He would know when it goes wrong.
So, Nicole, you've put your FOI request in. CASA have refused you an opportunity for you to receive a concise accounting of all this information. What was your next step?
As of this morning, I rang to see if there was any progress with contacting the cardiologist. And naturally, the poor girls on the front line, they said, oh, no, Nicole, we haven't heard back from the cardiologist. I said, would it be possible to send him a reminder? Oh, we've already done that. We can't send any more. It's classed as harassment. And we're at the mercy of him. I said, well, aren't I at the mercy of you people? She said, oh, yeah, I guess you are. So that's where it is at as of now.
So just a bit of background behind that. When she got her medical cancelled, we actually put in an appeal for reconsideration. From the date of that reconsideration going in, CASA have got 28 days to respond. They took 20 days, 18 days to send it off to a cardiologist for an independent review. And we're now at about 34 days. Am I right? Well, not quite that many.
That's right.
34 days since her reconsideration was popped in. So,
Sean, are these delays unique to Nicole? I mean, you obviously, look, I know in my conversations with so many other DAMEs around the country, I can answer this myself, but for the purpose of the senators and the other parliamentarians, and of course the people from infrastructure and other people within CASA that are watching these videos, this is not a unique situation. I mean, Nicole is not alone in suffering extensive delays, not being able to get clear answers, not being able to get clear information in response to an FOI, having to wait for CASA to move at glacial speed to actually action something. I mean, this is just not unique. I mean, this is really a cultural normality that goes on within their organisation, and they apparently really don't feel that what they do is that wrong.
No comment.
Just another number.
You're a brave man, Sean. You're a brave man. But it's not. I mean, Nicole, unfortunately, you're not alone. And, many of the comments that we've seen come through here already that have been flashing up, you can see there is a boiling frustration with many people who have to deal with Avmed. And, I've represented a few AOPA, quite a few AOPA Australia members on these issues and helped them behind the scenes. And typically what it takes to move something like this forward is to dump it literally on the desk of the Deputy Prime Minister's office and to say to him, can you explain to the Australian people how this authority that is under your responsibility, now understand that the legislative structure of CASA is it's its own bloody statutory authority, and that the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't necessarily have the power to go in there and force his hand. But, the realities are that CASA is a creation of the Parliament. And I guess the question that the Australian public should be asking is this good enough? Are their service standards good enough? And I would have to argue, and Sean, this is where I would look at this issue. I would not focus on our side. We know what our side in dealing with CASA is actually appalling. But let's invert the situation and let's look at how CASA behave when they make demands on people. You will respond by. You will answer us by this date, or we will come after you. We will prosecute and we will destroy you if you do not do what we say, when we say, and how high we say. And they're very good at metering out their authority, but they appear to be incredibly deficient in actually providing the service that they are there to provide as a regulatory authority and service provider. And keeping in perspective here that the industry in many respects has to pay CASA to get off its ass to do its job. And let's look at the commercial aviation industry, that if you want to make an amendment to an operations manual to support safe aviation, you've actually got to pay the safety authority for them to work with you to amend your ops manual for you to be safe under their rules. I mean, it is just a diabolical setup from top to bottom. Agree or disagree? No comment.
Yeah, you've been very careful.
Very diplomatic. As Annie here says, service standards is an oxymoron. Unfortunately, Annie, I think that in many respects it is an oxymoron. And I reflect on the statements made by Mr. Carmody and his brigade about how well CASA was improving and what a good job that they thought that they were doing by their customer survey or their industry survey, which they hand selected their participants and refused to allow industry bodies like AOPA to respond to it because they probably didn't want to hear the truth. Well, where does Nicole now go, Sean? What will be the next steps to try and get this most ridiculous situation resolved? And another question I'd like to ask is, who is the person inside of Avmed right now? What is the name of that person who is responsible for looking after this?
So the steps for Nicole are we have to sit and wait for that independent cardiology report and see what that's got to say. If we're lucky, it'll say what we think it should say and Nicole will go flying. If it doesn't, then Nicole's basically heading off to the AAT to appeal the decision. Who's responsible? Well, as I say, two of the most senior people are moving on. I've got no idea who's left in the ship, who's going to be making decisions, who can actually fix the situation.
Nicole, who are you currently
dealing
dealing with? I'm going to cut you off there, Sean. Nicole, who are you currently dealing with? Who has been the principal point of contact on your letters of communication?
Avmed. That's the general consensus. Every time I ring them, which is regularly, to say good morning to the girls, to let them know I'm still around, I get the girls at the front line, so the receptionists. When I ask to speak to someone next in line, they're reluctant to put me through, so I asked to wait. The last time I had to wait, I spoke with Susan Wood. I think she's a customer liaison. And then one day I actually spoke with an Avmed doctor, and that was Rachel McClellan. and that was only on one occasion. But David Fitzgerald, who's put these conditions on my medical, has never ever responded. So
we don't know. I mean, let me get this right. And I find this hard to believe, that there has not been a person designated to be the person responsible for dealing with this matter from start to finish, who has been a point of contact for you to enable you a clear pathway of communication, but also to ensure that we're not having a situation where communication is being misinterpreted or misunderstood as it changes hands from person to person. You don't have a case manager that looks after this?
No, I haven't got any feedback. Sorry, Sean.
No, you go. I'll finish in a minute.
I haven't got any official documentation in regards to my complex case, other than the information that Rachel McClellan, I think it's McClellan, spoke to me and said it's just going to an independent cardiologist, and that was it.
So just to clarify a little bit there, so David Fitzgerald was originally the case manager, but when Nicole put in for a reconsideration, it's moved to an independent person who hasn't looked at the file previously. So
what I'm interested, Sean, is I need a name. Who does the Senate need to call before the Senate inquiry to sit before the Senate RRAT and answer questions on this absolute garbage show of mismanagement? Who is the name of the person that needs to be called before the government to sit down and be questioned over the handling of this issue, so that someone can start to analyse how this situation has turned into such a train wreck?
So the three names that I would put forward in this case would be Shane Carmody, Mark Sullivan, and Simon May. And not because I think Mark and Simon have done anything wrong, but because they're the people who are leading the organisation in Avmed and have some idea on the workings and processes. As to who's actually making the decisions right now, we don't know.
I think it's imperative for Senator McDonald, who is the chair of the RRAT, to call Simon May before the Senate as a matter of urgency before his term expires. I'm not sure how much time he has left.
15 days.
But if he is now, well, if he's got 15 days remaining, it is imperative, if he's intending to move on, I think it's imperative that he be called before the government and he be given an opportunity to provide direct testimony as to how he has experienced his time inside of CASA and their processes, and also his perspectives on the senior executives' decision-making with respect to Avmed, and also to call before the government Mark Sullivan and allow Mark to have a chance to put his concerns on record. And let's not make any mistake here. And I know that what AOPA has been doing with respect to these interviews is very confronting for some people within the industry, because we as an industry have never stood up for ourselves like this before. We have never stood up and faced down the government and exposed these types of structural, systemic failures and put them into such a visible and understandable format that it is impossible to continue to believe that they are doing their job effectively. And I think that we cannot any longer as an industry sit back and be silent on these issues. We must absolutely, at every single turn, make it public and make it known, not just to everybody in Australia, but to put it out on the public record so everyone in the world can see how CASA performs on a day-to-day basis. Because I think for too long, there's been too many mistruths, there's been too much smoke and mirrors, and just generally too much bull dust about what a great organisation they are and what a great job they've been doing in managing the industry. Because the proof, ladies and gentlemen, is in the pudding of the condition of the industry. And it does not matter how you look at it, it doesn't matter which way you try to slice and dice it, the general aviation industry is in a desperate state because of the mismanagement and the lack of care and the lack of attention that our regulator has taken. And it starts with small issues. And if they can't get, this is a point I make in a lot of meetings. If they can't even get the basics right, how do we trust that they're getting the most complex issues right? And you can't. You just cannot trust that they're getting anything right when they can't get these basics done. So obviously, Nicole, it's a shit of a situation to be in. There is no doubt about it. And I am desperately sorry that someone who is so willing to be involved in aviation and to be making the economic contribution into aviation that you have been, that you now find yourself being stopped to contribute, because I know that the rest of the industry desperately needs more Nicole Mitchells. Our maintenance industry needs more Nicole Mitchells. Our flight training industry needs more Nicole Mitchells. Our aerial agriculture industry needs more Nicole Mitchells. Our helicopter industry needs more Nicole Mitchells. What nobody in our industry needs more of is more CASA garbage, right? More CASA mismanagement. And so it's just horrible that you've had to continue it. But I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that through this process and the process of the RRAT, that we're going to expose more and more of it. And I think that, it's very important when I ask you, who are the names? These people can't hide anymore. You can't hide. If you're involved in CASA and you're making shit decisions and it's impacting on our industry and it's causing decline in our industry, we are going to make you an internet sensation. Your name will be known and we will document what you've been doing, and we'll make sure that everyone gets to see it, because it's now the only way. It's the only way that we're going to clean up the system. So, Nicole, it takes a great deal of courage to come forward and talk about these issues. I thank you for having the courage to speak about it. If at any time you receive a phone call from CASA or any indication that you are being heavied or pressured as a consequence of you speaking up, you let us know, and you let us know the name of the person who's done it, and I'll personally see to it that we as an industry rally behind you to make sure that that person doesn't have a job inside of CASA anymore. Okay? And Sean, thank you very much for continuing. And next week, I'll check in to see if you still are a DAME. The good news is, Sean, mate, that people do respect people for standing up for what's right. And you've not, in my opinion, you certainly have not done anything that disrespects yourself or disrespects our industry. So stand tall with it, mate. Only good things can come from it. Thank you to both of you for having some time to talk about this particular issue tonight. We're going to be joined next week. I'm going to very carefully get my text message here. I have to read this correctly because I have to make certain that I qualify the comment for this particular individual. But next week, we're going to be joined by Clinton Mackenzie. Clinton's no stranger to AOPA Australia and to many throughout the aviation industry, but he will be joining us to speak about his experiences, his personal experiences, and first-hand experiences in dealing with Avmed. He's been involved in the aviation industry for 44 years, and he's been a pilot for 34 of those. And he will be with us on Tuesday, the 22nd of September, to talk about his particular experiences in dealing with Avmed and challenging Avmed. So we definitely look forward to that. And for anyone else that is currently going through an Avmed issue out there inside of the aviation industry, reach out and make contact with myself, or contact Sean, or speak with Dr. David Hook, who is our medical director on the board. Sean works with AOPA as one of our formal representatives down in Victoria. He does a fantastic job for our association, and you do a brilliant job, Sean, on behalf of the pilots that you look after as well. People speak very highly of you, and so if you do disappear overnight and we never hear of you again, we'll know where to start looking.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Thanks.
Okay, yet again, another episode of AOPA Facebook Live, and you don't need me to tell you how desperate this situation is. And many of you must be wondering how you can contribute at home, and how you can help AOPA, and you can help this push to weed out those within the regulator that are really creating significant decline for our industry. And this is how you can do that. 1, share these videos as far and as wide as you possibly can through social media, and see to it that every last person that you know in the aviation industry is aware that these take place weekly, and that they too can become aware of the content we are discussing. Also, send these videos to your local member, but don't just send it to them with no request. Send it with a formal request that your local member watch this video and make representations to the Deputy Prime Minister's office that these issues are investigated formally. If every single one of us right across the aviation industry starts sending this content to our local members and demanding investigations, action will take place. Things will start to change. And it is certainly a long road. And I'll make this comment again for everybody. The pathway for significant change is not one that will happen overnight. It is unfortunately a long game. But what is critical is that we are determined and we show absolute tenacity in never giving up on this. And hopefully what AOPA Australia is showing the industry is exactly that. And if you'd like to support AOPA and to keep the fuel in our tanks to see to it that we can make it to the target and then get back home, I welcome you all to take up a membership to AOPA Australia. It's just $129. And for that $129, you are funding an advocate that will fight for you determinedly to see to it that we bring about a period of economic prosperity for general aviation that we have long deserved. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And I look forward to being back later in the week